On this podcast episode, I have with me Erin Peterson. She's the head of talent on the growth team at Great Hill Partners. We're going to be talking about AI's impact on talent. And what do I mean? Well, obviously, AI, Gen AI solutions are being spoken to, talked about in every single industry. We're going to talk about how does that apply to the talent industry? What can be automated? What should be automated? What are we looking to achieve with it? Where's the productivity coming from? And we're going to also talk about the difference between leaders and managers, the people that have to drive some of these solutions and how that kind of fits into the equation. Erin, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Amir. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, can you let the audience know what Great Hill Partners does?
Now, Great Hill Partners is a Boston-based private equity firm. We invest primarily in SaaS B2B software companies. We have 4 subsegments: fintech, digital commerce, healthcare, and then general software. We also have a London office, which I was very pleased to help establish last year. And it's just a real pleasure for me to be there and help them primarily with the talent in the portfolio companies. We have 40 portfolio companies, and when they have a C-level need, they typically will call me, and I'll work with our great search firms to be able to find those new people. But I also oversee hiring for the fund, which basically means 5 to 10 investors that we hire every year to bring into the company.
I guess, I really haven't covered the impact of Gen AI or AI within the talent space. I think this is a great topic. I guess when we're looking at the potentials of areas that we could focus AI to, are there any areas that you go, these are the top maybe couple that if we could optimize, we'd be improving the state of things?
Well, I think process automation is not new, right? We've always been thinking about what is it that we do repeatedly that could be automated, that could be optimized. And so that, I would argue, as a talent acquisition professional and as a leader coming out of the corporate realm, I've always been focused on. Let's just step back and realize that time to fill hasn't really changed in my entire career. I've been doing talent acquisition for 30 years. And with every team that I've led at Aon or Amazon or Accenture, I keep asking, can we shorten time to fill? And so far, the answer is not much, a little bit. But if you break it down into its component parts, I think what you find is that there are some really self-evident areas that could be optimized, like scheduling. This is the bane of the existence of every talent acquisition team I know. If scheduling could be solved, we would probably cut 5 days off or more off of the talent acquisition process. If interviews could be contained to a manageable number, that could cut some time off. If we could get better information from interviews to get interviewers more comfortable with the data that they're collecting, perhaps that shortening of the interview process could happen. So I think there's a number of ways that we have tried to optimize and automate talent in the last, let's call it 10, 20 years. But I think we now have this real opportunity for the machines, as they call it, to do some of our work and free up talent acquisition leaders and practitioners to actually do the value add activity, which is build relationships with candidates, make sure that they feel comfortable, build the brand, so on and so forth. So I've been looking into this quite a bit. It's new to everybody, right? I don't know that any of us have the answer, but I think it's a kind of a brand new opportunity for us to think about talent differently.
I want to dig into you mentioned the value add. So I think this is an interesting component of it because obviously in talent, there's a lot of manual things. The first place we've started to see the idea of automation typically comes towards content, right? Email messaging, sourcing, some of the stuff that takes a lot of overhead. I guess that is something that does add value. Is that automating that? Is that a precursor to us doing something else with that time? Or is that a core component of, hey, this is going to help us just become more effective in what we are doing?
When you think about the assumption that we can just have a number of people who we don't have to have on the team anymore on the basis of the work time that's saved, I don't know that that's going to happen immediately. I think work is going to change over time. And I think what we need to think about is there's just some stuff not getting done very well that we might have a little time freed up in order to do better. For example, when you spend 30 minutes writing and revising a job description on the basis of an intake conversation that you just had with the hiring manager, that's valuable time. You'll never get it back. So if, for example, we had a tool like MetaView, which is one of the tools we've been reviewing on a task force that I've created in Great Help Partners, the conversation's recorded, the results are documented, it's already pulling out themes for you. And let's say you could take that conversation that's documented and put it into Perplexity or ChatGPT and have it create the job description for you. You're probably about 90% of the way there. And then, of course, the humans involved have to do a few fine little tweaks, or maybe someday none at all. And all of a sudden, you've got 30 minutes freed up. So what are you going to do with that time? Well, you might one more time look at Glassdoor and see if there's any issues with your brand. You might source one more candidate, because I think most responsible recruiters always have a sense of FOMO. Who did I leave on the table? Who did I miss? So maybe more time sourcing. And oh, by the way, there's plenty of AI tools that are doing sourcing for us now. So finding candidates in a way that they never could before. So maybe I'm checking my AI sourcing tool one more time to see if there's a new candidate. So, I would say quality, the opportunity initially is the quality of the work that we do should increase and the administrative burden goes down. But I think then it's time to think about how could we do it with fewer resources and less time. When I worked at Amazon, there was a sort of an initiative underway, and this isn't secret anymore, it's ancient history, but they called it the no-touch recruiting project. They were considering whether it would be possible to bring someone into the company with very little or few touches, obviously for the purpose of efficiency. And frankly, I don't think at the time there was maybe a little controversy around it, but I didn't view it that way. I thought, candidates want it to go fast also, for the most part. They want it to be efficient. They don't want to have the drag of another interview and another and no feedback and the black hole. I mean, it's very frustrating as a candidate, right? So I think there's all kinds of good reasons to increase speed and reduce the burden of the process. So I wasn't part of that project necessarily, but I admired it for the true innovation that it might bring to what we do. I think still nobody is doing true no-touch recruiting, and that might not be something we ever really want to do. But heck, if we could get it down to a day or a week, wouldn't that be awesome? Speaking of which, sorry to ramble on here, but I do get kind of excited about this. Paradox Olivia is one of my favorite early front runners with regard to AI recruiting. And they do the recruitment for most of the McDonald's franchises, and I think a number of other fast food franchises, but it doesn't have to be just contained to hourly workers. They just take all of the administrative burden out of it and have the chatbot do the work. Candidates get quick feedback, get an interview scheduled, and all of a sudden, 24 hours later, they're working. So how cool is that? And shouldn't we all aspire to something appropriately close to that for maybe, let's call it, non-executive positions?
Yeah, it's actually super interesting. I think you bring up a couple of points that would be nice to dig in. And a lot of what I was listening to, a lot of the process, a lot of the overhead takes up our time and really takes away from what we like to do, that community building, that outreach, that marketing. And I've always kind of held that recruiting aligns really well with marketing. When you take away process, will we maybe see a shift in the role as we do take away more of just the overhead and the repetitive tasks to allowing us to be better marketers?
Perhaps, but I have to say, when I have led both large and small teams of recruiters, there is one constant that holds that I have noticed and that I have really encouraged, actually, which is recruiters don't come in just one shape and size. There are those who emphasize and really prefer to spend their time relationship building with candidates and hiring managers. There are others who are more administratively gifted and really excel at the whole running the process. And then there are those who are really the R&D folks, the people who really love finding candidates and engaging them, but they may not really have the patience for running the process, and especially dealing with all the messiness and variability that comes in the recruitment process, right? So I have typically divided my teams into sourcers, candidate care, and operations. You don't typically find all three of those strong skill sets in one human being. So what I've typically done is give them the choice, and then ultimately when the team is formed, then only hire people into one of those three teams. Now they can swap between teams if they want to, but I find once they find their swim lane, they're typically pretty happy and they like doing what is a focused set of work. Ultimately, I hope that those, for example, if a team is split into those three pieces, the operations team might be able to shrink a little bit on the basis of that technology is helping us with some of these things. But then, you might think about the sourcing team is the ones who are developing the job descriptions and figuring out what companies to go after to find the talent. Well, that's actually going to get a little slimmer as well as technology helps us figure all that out. And especially generative AI that's kind of serving up the answers, even serving up the candidates without us going to a specific candidate pool. And in the middle, there's the human touch, which maybe will shrink if we get more efficient on the interview process. But still, at the end of the day, I think candidates buy a relationship. So that probably is going to hold. So is that what you had in mind, or were you thinking of something?
No, that's actually interesting. I think, that does address, I think, some of what I was thinking towards, and you made me start thinking even more, because I guess when we look at recruiting, we look at talent acquisition, there's been a big discussion about personalization, understanding the persona you're recruiting, understanding the target audience, all that.
Experience. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, experience. As we see more AI tools come in, they're going to get really good. But obviously, everyone will have access to these same tools. How do we retain AI potentially as a competitive advantage if everyone's going to have better answers, better solutions, more targeted responses? Do we gain competitive advantage? How do you kind of see that unfolding?
Well, so we're lucky in that the talent board has done a great job of doing the research on what candidates want. And so I think if we design our technology solutions around the what candidates want, we're a lot better off and able to automate, not just for the sake of automation, but for the sake of the candidate experience. So for example, the data that they publish annually typically centers on a couple of key things. Number one, providing good information about the company and about the roles, and in an authentic way, not in a salesy marketing way. Secondly, give and receive feedback. So if a company is automating the process of requesting feedback from the candidate and also giving them feedback about how the process went, how did they do in their interview, you're just going to enhance the whole candidate experience without it being an awkward conversation between the recruiter and the candidate. Or maybe it frees up the recruiter to give the feedback so that there is that human component when all the rest of it is automated. So that could be another component. And then the sort of final thing that they typically say makes the big difference on companies that are rated highly in candidate experience is to describe the process and follow it. So if you tell me there's going to be 10 interviews, I can live as long as I know there's going to be 10 interviews, and then I'm counting down. And if you add an 11th one, I'm not going to be a happy candidate, right? So automation of the process can help us systematize it so that we can actually make promises and hold to them. Ideally, we do the Amazon thing, which is set your expectations low and exceed them. That would be the best process of all if we were to do that in recruitment. So I do think as long as we anchor ourselves on creating a great candidate experience, there's a lot in that could be assigned to generative AI.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it could be very interesting as we collect more information relevant to our employees, the target future employees, the past employees, that all that metadata that I don't know if we really are capturing right now. I think that's going to be my next question. Is I think if we start to leverage what is maybe not as systematized in terms of the information we capture, I think there's a lot of power. I do think there's competitive advantage within data repositories, within ATSs, within other systems that, when fed in, could provide a very good image of, hey, this is the skill sets, or this is the type of background that has excelled here. And I do think that's interesting. I think it's dangerous on the other token, because I do think we could start seeing the system provide some biases in terms of who they'd want to target. I could see, and obviously this is a bigger Gen AI conversation. I don't think it's just honed in on talent. But I guess just to kind of get your thoughts on it, as we start pulling in the right data pieces, start modeling the right type of processes we're looking to solve here, is there a chance that the data itself could lead us down an incorrect path?
So I have so many thoughts on what you just said. There's a lot of different components that we can consider here. I will say, though, that my bias is usually toward technology. I am very bullish on technology improving our lives in the way that it has, in so many different ways in the last 20 or 30 years. And I usually make the analogy between technology and recruiting to technology and self-driving cars. Okay, we haven't gotten there yet, but we're told that we will get there. And when you look at data and how imperfect the average driver is, how distracted they are, what the accident level is, and then you think about, well, if a machine was doing that work, would it be better? Well, I think the data point to, yes, we are probably going to have fewer fatalities, significantly fewer fatalities on the road as a result. So I think if I apply that concept to the work that we do in talent acquisition, there's certainly a human component. There's a judgment component, just like there is in driving. But if we were to allocate, let's call it 80% of the work we do today to technologies that will help us build our brand, source, manage candidates, assess their backgrounds, make good decisions on whether they're going to be a long-term fit with the company, and then close the deal, I've got to believe that the overall process will end up much better. Is there going to be bias in that? Well, I think if we ask that, we have to assume there isn't bias today. And I think we all know the answer to that. There's plenty of bias. I would love, if I could take the bias that's in the process today and cut out 20% of it, I think that would be a win. And then little by little, we'd be gathering data so that we could cut it out more and more and more over time. And pretty soon, of course, the human component has to be there, both to make decisions and to sell the opportunity to the candidate. But that could end up being a much less of a heavy lift than it is today. And therefore, I think cut some of the bias out. I could go on, but go ahead.
No, I love it. I think you just articulated my thoughts on self-driving cars. I joke with my wife. I go, I would take it as its current state any day, just because our life expectancy would take a jump. I don't know the numbers. I'm not gonna, but I can't help but imagine life expectancy will, and just quality of life for people. I actually 100% on board with everything you said about we have bias now. We've seen it. I mean, you've seen it. People are, as even talent experts and professionals, we know this, and yet we're also guilty of scanning a resume, looking for what we think the hiring manager wants, and kind of getting too tunnel visioned in. It happens every day. Can a system improve that? Probably. Can it get worse? Okay, there are ways it could actually get worse, but I don't think we're going to be putting ourselves in that much of a worse position. I think the one thing you said that I was very curious about is, and going back to, you kind of broke out, I see distinct roles within this process, which I think is correct. I think that makes sense. If you were to think about the opportunity within this space of redefining the traditional. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think there's a whole host of legacy stuff that happens that no one ever really questions, just because it's been the way it's done. I mean, the way a job description's written looks the same as it did when it was probably newspaper print or fax to someone as it does now on the internet. And it doesn't need to, but it's just the way it's done. And this discussion of the future work changing and talent acquisition, HR 2, all this stuff, to get there, to actually make those changes and shifts, it's not just the technology. There's got to be something more than just the technology that bridges that gap. But what is that in your opinion?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that, so for example, if you take the use case of putting a job description or putting criteria into Perplexity or ChatGPT or Claude or Llama, pick your platform and ask it to come up with a job description, it's going to be reaching into existing data, aggregating that and serving up something pretty similar to perhaps what you would have written yourself. You just save the time writing it. So I think we still need to put our more progressive lens on it and think to ourselves, is that still relevant? For example, when a job description says, I need 5 years of experience in supply chain management, for example. And when I think about what's happening to supply chain management, which is being completely disrupted by generative AI, I have to ask myself, really, how relevant is that 5 years in the past to what's going to happen in the future? So I think what we can do is save ourselves time with generative AI, but then put our own critical thinking on top of it to think forward rather than to think backward about what the future is going to demand. And on that note, I have to say, we're a technology firm. We invest in SaaS B2B software companies. So I've been doing a significant amount of thinking about how we need to think differently about the types of people that we hire. Of course, technology assisted services in many cases won't change significantly, the services part of it, but the technology will, and we have to have the right level of talent. So honestly, a year ago when Gen AI was really on the forefront of all of the headlines, I started thinking about, well, what even is that? What are those skills? What do I need to start anticipating that hiring managers are going to start asking for? We don't even know the nomenclature or the right words to use. So I actually went to ChatGPT and I put in a prompt that said, what are we talking about when we are looking for AI talent? And it did a pretty good job of giving me some words to use. I don't know really how long they will endure. I think the language around AI will certainly evolve. But for example, I got responses. Actually, I have the list in front of me here. I have 15 job titles that it served up to me. AI Chief Officer, which is interesting. It's not Chief AI Officer, it's AI Chief Officer. So AI first. An AI Solutions Architect, that is not so surprising. Machine Engineering Manager, AI Product Manager, Conversational AI Developer, AI Ethics and Bias Specialist. Now that's an interesting job title. AI Governance, Edge AI Developer, AI Infrastructure Engineer, on and on and on. So and it goes down into the Education and Training Specialist. So, I think what it's doing is aggregating from roles that we knew existed anyway and specializing them to approach AI in business technologies in the way that you might need them to. What I didn't see is change management expert. And I do think that is worthy of consideration because people are afraid of change. They don't like it. They resist it. Even people who are highly technical sometimes want to do things the way that they were taught. And finding new ways to do it is not always the thing that they're going to do first. So I think change management is not a new discipline, but it is probably emerging again as something super important to think about in AI.
That's fantastic. I actually think the change management component of it, I think there's an aspect to the process itself needing to be reexamined, which I think maybe in some components talent has and some haven't. I mean, I think I don't want to make a blanket statement, so I'm sure there's things that have really progressed from where they could be, but there's things that haven't. I think with AI, I think the pressure is going to fall onto someone within people talent to go, okay, if my team didn't have to, if my team could, I think if we start asking those questions that we see in a lot of other line of business units, and they go through and they do a change management to the process and all that stuff, I think we could actually see unique roles in talent kind of pop up. And I guess the question, maybe a final question I'll put to you, is about that leadership component, right? So in the discussion of people, HR, there's always been a conversation, a seat at the table. Not as much now, but it has been there for a long time. It's kind of lingered. I've always viewed that as it's just interacting with business, having ideas that impact the business. That's the seat at the table. I don't get a seat at the table. It's if I can impact the business, do they want me to sit with them? Because otherwise I'm just a process manager. When it comes to AI and you're starting to get to the core of some of these processes, leadership and management are going to be two different things that are going to come to surface. What will be some of the things, some of the challenges that talent people lead are going to have to deal with to actually lead within AI process change in talent?
Yeah, well, this is something we've been doing a lot of thinking about. As part of my role, I coordinate the talent leaders in each of our 40 portfolio companies. And when I say coordinate, they don't report to me. I'm just here to help. So it's definitely a humble posture. I've been in talent acquisition a long time, led big teams. So hopefully I have something to offer them in terms of a perspective on leading talent acquisition. And we talk a lot about becoming more efficient and effective. And then we talk a lot about what we don't know. And one of the things I love about Great Hill Partners is that we prioritize humility, because we're pretty sure there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And we want people to be, as you talk about having a seat at the table. If you have a seat at the table, it means you have a seat that is a humble seat, that is a learning seat, that you are figuring things out. And you are not necessarily expected to come with all the answers, but you're expected to know what the questions are. And then perhaps to prioritize time spent figuring out what the answers could be. And that typically is a collaborative mindset. I mentioned earlier, we have an AI task force. I asked the entire portfolio if there's anyone who'd be interested in helping me research talent acquisition technologies that have an AI component, so that we can spend a little time distilling what might be the best solutions for all of the portfolio companies. And 5 of them put their hand up. We meet every 2 weeks. The team has taken assignments to go and do demos and do research on the various technologies that are out there. So some of the ones that I rattled off earlier are part of the work that they've done. And I'm learning. And I think when you think about leadership versus management, they're interconnected, of course. But I think we as talent acquisition leaders, it's incumbent upon us to come with an open mind, with a curious mind, with a candidate experience mind, always keeping that in the forefront. And then figuring out how we don't have to have all the answers, but that we can coordinate other people helping us get to answers. And hopefully they learn along the way and they become leaders as well. So leadership sort of spawns leadership. And then I think maybe the final thought that I would have regarding this very interesting new area of non-expertise that we all have, of large language models and machine learning and generative AI and AI tools, is that we need to think about it in terms of upskilling, not replacing necessarily. If you decide, hey, we need to replace this person with somebody who has the skills, guess what? Nobody has the skills yet. Maybe a few people, but not en masse that you. So perhaps we as talent leaders need to think more about growing the talent that we need, as opposed to always thinking we can go out to market and find it in this case. Come with solutions, come with a point of view, come with a lot of curiosity, and an ability to find the answers. And I think that gives you the trust level with leaders, other leaders, so that you get invited back to the table. I serve at the pleasure. That's kind of how I view my role. And if I keep getting invited back to help, then I consider that a good day.
I like that a lot. I think that's well said, because I do hear a lot of people mention that they're there to serve the business. And I always counter. I go, so is the accounting, so is the financing, so is the engineering team, so is the DevOps team, so is the marketing team. They're all there to serve the business. And I think you just put it so eloquently in terms of how to establish that and how to maintain that, which I think is even harder than being able to get to that point. You mentioned, I lied. One more question. You're doing great at making my mind work. So upskilling. When you think about upskilling, the one thing that obviously within the talent space that happens is we have metrics that are based on how productive and how busy somebody in talent is. Other people can debate the metrics and the type of metrics that they're using, but we're really still worried about efficiency. We're worried about very much yield management type metrics. When we think about upskilling and trying to move somebody to a role where they, as we've been talking about this whole episode, about less of this productivity constraints, will that force us to re-examine the metrics too? Because all of a sudden, I'm not really directly responsible for how many interviews are booked, how many offers are made. I mean, there might be an AI or a component AI handling all that. Where do you think, and that's maybe a big question, but I just out of curiosity, where you think metrics go from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think any function needs to think in new ways about how we're measuring success. So let's just start with activity versus results. I've always, as I've led teams in the past, I have tried to help them focus on the results versus the activity, because any recruiter, especially good ones, ambitious ones, will at some point look at you with exhaustion and say, I've got too many recs. Okay, so that's an interesting point of feedback. But if we step back and think about, does that recruiter know how many hires we want them to get this month? I would rather focus my recruiters on results than on activity. Recs are a measure of activity, not so much results. If I tell them, I need you to get 5 hires, or depending on the level, fewer, more, depending. I need you to get 5 hires this month. Can you do that? All of a sudden, you see the wheels start turning in their head because they're thinking about the barriers to that, as opposed to how busy they are and how many recs that they're working on. If we apply that results orientation to then the AI tools that could help us get over those barriers, I think there's a lot of hope. It also means that recruiters need to upskill. So they need to think about, okay, do I even know how to write a good prompt on Perplexity? Do I even know how to source talent using this new tool that my boss just paid a lot of money for? Maybe I better kick it into high gear and figure out how to use that tool instead of always complaining about how many recs that I have. So that would be my approach to it. Now, if you step back, you also have to measure results. And I typically hinge on cost, quality, speed, productivity from the perspective of how many hires did we make, and then satisfaction, both hiring manager and candidate satisfaction. I don't know that those measures change over time. I think the way we get to the happy place with the results of those certainly will change.
You know what? I love it. I actually am hopeful that candidate experience will be one of the bigger metrics moving forward, because if we're not spending time in all these different touch points and we have a lot more time, we should be able to make that extra call, do that extra follow up, do the extra check in, never have a candidate say, oh, the recruiter ghosted me. Like, those are things that hopefully should never ever happen. Anyways, it happens because people are constrained. It explains it, doesn't excuse it, is how my wife tries to explain it to me. So I stole her line. And I think it's going to be interesting, because I think we're going to have to change a lot of things. I know we've gone over. I'm sorry. You're just kicking out a lot of good thoughts, and I didn't want to stop, but I do want to let you get back to actually do the day job and tackling the work you're doing. If somebody wants to reach out to you, to connect with you, to continue the conversation about AI's impact within talent, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to have this conversation over and over. It is my life's work as well as my passion, as you might be able to tell. And so, best way to reach out to me would be via LinkedIn. I'm pretty good about checking messages that come to me through that avenue. And by the way, I think it's more important to teach a person to fish than it is to hand them a fish. And so I gave a shout out earlier to the Talent Board. I love that organization. I think they've done a great job of helping us all understand what the components of candidate experience are. But also another organization that I've relied on a lot, which is the Talent Tech Labs, TTL.org, I think. And they have this wonderful tool called the ecosystem that they publish about every 6 months or so. It's an updated version of what are the technologies in each of the steps of the talent acquisition lifecycle that could help make things more efficient and effective. And of course, these days they have an AI lens on top of that. So feel free to reach out to me, but I don't have all the answers. I would say go to these resources first, educate yourself, and then let's continue the discussion.
Awesome. I definitely appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Amir.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think this is a great conversation. I know we didn't exhaust it. I tried to get in as many questions as I could to Erin, but obviously we can only get so far. So please reach out to her or one of the resources. We'll link to some of those resources. I think those are great to also take advantage of. But share this with somebody else. I think the more we start talking about this, the more this is on everyone's lens. I think it's going to be better. So please share this episode with someone else who's going to benefit from it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Thank you and goodbye.